Hello, and thank you for joining this event at what is probably an awkward time for almost everyone. I am David Solo, and I manage the grants program for 10x10 Photobooks. And welcome to this presentation of the work that has been done in our second cycle of 10x10 research grants. This is a program to explore photobook history, aiming to encourage and support scholarship on underexplored topics in photobook history. We continue to see an amazing range of ideas proposed, which I think is a testament to how much more there is to explore in this field and the energy around it. And I am very much looking forward to hearing and sharing tonight the results of this research. The second cycle of 10x10's research grants were generously supported by an anonymous donor and by Dayanita Singh. And we will very shortly, I think by the end of February, be announcing the winners for the third cycle of grants. So hopefully in a year's time, we'll be hearing those results as well. We are recording this event and have muted the attendees, but please feel free to share any comments or questions in the chat window. And please observe our code of conduct and be respectful to all the attendees. I will try to collect any questions that come during the talks, and we will share those and have the conversation at the end of the session. I will also unmute folks then in case people would like to ask their questions directly. So today we will have three presentations of about 25 minutes each from our three researchers, and then follow it up with the discussion and Q&A. The first presenter is Lin Junye, who is an editor, writer, self-publisher, and photobook fair organizer based in Taipei, Taiwan, with a focus on photography, photographic publishing, and the ways of seeing between photography practitioners in Taiwan and Southeast Asia and their readers in our time. In 2018, she co-founded an artist-led initiative, Photobook Dummies Day. Her recent publishing project is Tropical Reading, Photobooks, and Self-Publishing. And so, happy to turn it over. Thank you very much.
So, hello everyone. I'm Junye, and thanks for David to introduce me. And today I'm going to share with you my research topic, which is Woman Behind the Pages, Dialogues in Photobook Making from Southeast Asia through Editing, Designing, and Self-Publishing. So here is a really big map, and basically it contains all the book lists me and my partner, we've been collecting over the years. So as David just introduced, I create this artist initiative called Photobook Dummies Day, and we focus on photobook and self-publishing. And back to 2019, I started to be really curious about Southeast Asia. The reason is that we used to run a bookstore, and now we're not running it anymore, but we still have our photobook fair annually. And I started to be really curious about it. And if you can see on this map, the green dot is Taiwan, and that's where I'm from. And then this colorful dot in the middle right, that's all the Southeast Asian different countries. Some of them have been doing the field trip there, and some of them we have friends over, they came to Taipei to join our fair. So collected a book over there, and it's around 14 cities. And I think our small collection has around 150 books, maybe more, a little bit more than 100 are from Southeast Asia, different cities. And then we interview around 100 people since 2019. And that's how I started to get to know Southeast Asia. And before I started to dig into self-publishing, I would like to talk about Art Book Fair a little bit. I think you all know, Art Book Fair, it's a very important gathering spot for photobook makers and for self-publisher. And Art Book Fair in Southeast Asia happened around 2013, 2018. I will explain later why there's like 2 dates. And like there's like Singapore Art Book Fair, which is the main one and it's the biggest one, and Bangkok Art Book Fair, Jakarta Art Book Fair, KL Art Book Fair, and Sibiu Art Book Fair, which is relatively small and new, and I haven't really personally in contact with them yet. So the 4 other art book fair, they're more like capital art book fairs. So they're based in the city and they're like have different programs and engage international exhibitors. And it started around this 6-7 years. And so when I first visited Southeast Asia, it's actually when everything started to come together. And for Singapore Art Book Fair, according to the founder, Renee, basically 2013, she was already running it, but she wasn't managing it. And 2018, she took over. And the moment there were lots of exhibitors talk to her, say they feel like they want the fair to be more like art book based. In the beginning, it's a little bit more art market merchandising mix. So she personally say at 2018, it become more like art book fair, like we know. So in this 7 years, or this over a decade, in Southeast Asia, basically the photo book, it become more and more like familiar. People are more familiar with it and there are more and more audience. And then here comes to the self-publishing. Like, actually, I think that's always a difficult question when people ask, what do you do? Like, so for me, it's really hard to answer, right? Like, I'm a photographer. I do my own book. I designed it. Sometimes I even print it and then bind it. And then turn around, I become the dealer of my own work. So that's like the situation if you're a self-publisher or you're an artist who publish your own work, or you own like a small scale publishers. Like this is like what you do. So it's like all character in one. So if you make book in Southeast Asia and you are like publishing, it's basically mostly like that. And there's like different character in this like very long train. There's like artist, photographer, artist collective, as I say, publisher and editor, designer, binder, printer, and also like the system where you can sell it, which is art book fair or like some bookstore or like some community, they will have the system to help to sell. And when it comes to Southeast Asia, there are a few things I encounter in my own research, and like basically there's a different limitation and different like censorship problem. So the most common one I'm listed here, like the limitation, which is everybody talk about is like government funding. Basically, there's no government funding in Southeast Asia. I said except Singapore, most of the places are difficult to get any support. So also it's lacking of infrastructure and the reference. Basically, it's hard to get book from outside sometimes. And there's also production quality problem, like it's hard to find a printer which is satisfying. And there's traffic, third-party payment, also the distribution all in one. And the last one is the most common one. Basically, there's a limited place to exhibit for like young artists and photographer. And you heard this basically everywhere for people who make book as their medium. And the censorship problem is a little bit more complicated. So different country, different city have their different rules. Like in Thailand, mostly it's about monarchy, right? Like, and Indonesia, they have this law about like fake news and also everything related to child pornography. Like basically it's like a no, like, so if you import book and there's a little bit, they call it pornography on top of the cover, you might be blocked. And then there's Malaysia, so they're conflicting race. And then there's also Vietnam. Like Vietnam, the problem is more complicated. I will go through it later when I introduce the work. So basically you need a permission to publish. And also like there's all the problem all in one. So Vietnam have like more difficult situation. And later on, what I'm gonna talk about is the overview of like, I pick like the overview of different characters like in the self-publishing scene in Southeast Asia. And we're going to talk about what they do and what they do, why they do it that way. And I will introduce you some of their works to talk about it and how they face constraints. So I use the word from one of my friends, Wu Bing. He's also like spend lots of time research like Southeast Asia photography. So when we comes to like look at those work with our Western gaze, it's not really about the differences. It's really about what's the desires and the need behind the people when it comes to the media. So if you applied it on like photo book, what I care about is the design behind the creation process of a photo book and self-publishing in the region. And later on, my sharing will be a little bit more like not comprehensive, more personal and ongoing, because as a woman like self-publisher, it's actually it's a little bit harder to find the woman practitioner when it comes to the scene. Like according to what I say, the research in the book we collected, there's around like 1/5, a little bit more 1/5 of like female. And I already kind of be very aware because I want to see the work from different like woman practitioners. So later on, I'm gonna share the view of that. And so I will go to talk to the more individual practice to more collective approach, because in Southeast Asia, that's one of the things that people actually work hugely together in collaboration as a collective. So that's a differences I see here. So this is the first work I am introduced to you, and this is the artist like Minstrel Wolf, and she's like basically the artist as a self-publisher. She's her own editor, her own designer, her own printer, and she started to make her book when she was living in France. And her work is like this. Basically, it's like pictures in sequence. So it's not like she have like one frame of work, one frame of work. Mostly she work with a sequence. So for her book, it's like a nature medium she chose. And when she moved back to KL back then, there was like few difficulties. For example, like in KL, like they don't really treat this kind of work according to the artist like as art. So that was the first difficulty. And second difficulty is that it's really hard also for find a production like which fits and which is available for her. So Minstrel at the end like brought both a very big like printing machine that which can print A3. So she print all her work herself at home, and she home bind them, home print them, and she do everything herself. And when it comes to that, she can only do one book. So all her book is basically 1 to 2 edition, and according to the limitation she has here. And this book is one of the books she did like recently. It's about like the KL like trilogy, and so her work actually looks very personal. I feel like when I first encounter it, but if you keep looking at it, like this work, she actually talked to. This one is called National Baby, and the next book is called Guest Room. That's the picture when she first came back to KL she took, and then it's like today in memories. So those were as a combination shows her as a person, like how she reflect on herself, like back to the society, the Malaysian Chinese society, the community as a woman, like how she react with it. So this is Minstrel. And the next one I want to introduce you, it's Pam. So Pam, it's like artist, and she's now living in New Zealand, but she was based in Bangkok before. And her work is like she's an artist, she's a photographer, and she also designed. So it's also really, really mixed in different characters. And this work is called Dialogue with Memory Object. So as you see, there's like different objects name, and then there's with different photo, and it's talking about the memories. Like she started to learn about a different archetype of different object and like trying to mix it. And then she's curious about how when we read it and when we like look at the picture, that's create very different connections. And her work also looked relatively personal, but according to herself, like she's like the generation of like the Chinese generation, like she's a diaspora, and she worked hugely with them. So her work looked very personal, but it's always related to like memory and missing. It's also kind of a reflect of her state, her generation state. If you are like the immigrant, like you will feel like the unstable of the politics back to your society. And she also do the design, as I see. Oh, there's missing one page, but she also do design for different artist run space in Bangkok. And in Bangkok, there's not a lot of collective like in Indonesia, but in Bangkok, like those artist run space are also like the young artists, they gather together, and it's like a loose community. Everybody's quite individual, but it's the way to work in collaboration and to help each other to like exhibit the things they really like, and without the funding. And then here comes Maca. So this is the one more complicated one I mentioned earlier. And I noticed like Maca just took over the 10x10 like account. So maybe people already see her work, and they have like a small artist run space back to Hanoi. And they also was like an online journal. And the one I want to introduce is the editor, program coordinator, Hadal. And she's also a photographer herself. And she run kind of like co-run this whole project with their founders, and this is like the publication they make. And why this publication it's like very special. It's like when it comes to Vietnam, like you will see that, for example, there was like a small like a logo or something on the cover of the book. And when you see this, it means like that's a publisher need to verify it. So in Vietnam, if you need to publish anything, basically you need to find a government appointed like publisher. So it's around like, I'm not sure now the real number, but like 20 something, I guess. And then they will check your content. And if they think it's okay, they'll give you a permission to publish. So you need permission to publish and to print. If you don't have those permission, then you cannot even find a printer. So for market, I think that's a very like interesting approach, because in Vietnam, I've been encountered in my research that everybody complained that it's really hard to even export books. And so to go through like this classic way, like to go through this like traditional way to publish is like really a lot of work. And the interesting things of this book is that it's called Maca, and they now already published the second one. But this one is talking about a more like very like local street Vietnam photography, and it's talking a Vietnamese photography village. So it sounds like a hard topic because it's like a photo history, but it's used a very like personal way. Like the approach are very like very, it's with tips, but it's very like readable content. You really enjoy it, and the way how they've been like designed, and it's also really like you're looking at a show. Like I probably cannot really find the page at the moment, but basically you can unfold the page and they have like different like small pages inside. So I really appreciate editor Hardal, like how she put her effort in this book and trying to publish it, and also trying to like introduce this book to not just like photography people who are interested in photography or book, and also basically readers who they're not really familiar with this medium of like photo book or art book or the magazine. And that's the few pages in this book, and that's the second like publication. It's also called Market, and like this one is even more personal. Basically, they have artists over, and artists do their own personal project, and that's actually their goal. Like they want to talk about story more from the personal perspective. Okay, so this one is a special one, and it's the last more individual approach I will introduce, and it's called like Truma Collective. I'm sure some of you already hear about this. So they're a female collective, like it's called Truma. Truma is her, so it's like a woman like journalist collective back to Myanmar. Now I think they're mostly not in Myanmar anymore, but when I was back to 2019, they were still there. And this collective, they're the first like female journalist collective. It's really hard to find either like bookmakers or like people who are related to this medium in Yangon, and they are the one. So this book are the collaboration of this photographer with another collective in Bangladesh called Kai Collective. And that's the book they collaborate together. So here are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 books. So there's like 12 photographers here. And the interesting approach of this is like in Myanmar, basically like it's difficult to find a place to exhibit. So they use the book as a medium to carry basically this message of like those like documentary photography like approach, and they would like people who cannot really see their exhibition have a chance to see those books. And another one is in Myanmar. There's like the only place is called like Myanmar Delta, and they actually have like an open photo book library. And so if you want to get this book from abroad, you cannot buy it actually. So you can only exchange. So you send them the book, they will put it in their library and you can exchange with them. So that's how we got this book back then. And it's according to the artist, like this, for them in Myanmar, the physical books are relatively an easy escape from the censorship, because the censorship happen mostly online. Okay, so that's a page inside. Okay, here comes the more like collective approach of the self-publishing like practice. So this is Sokong, and I would like to introduce Nia. And Nia is a artist and a photographer and also the organizer, and she also edit. And Sokong is like it's like a collective which based in Jakarta, and they have like 5 people now. The two is the mostly active one. They mostly have like this community vibe, right? Like there's a collective, everybody are welcome, then discuss, and they have a lot of workshop talk about books. And this is that there's digital publishing platform. So their goal, Sokong is actually Indonesian support. So their goal is to support young like practitioner who wants to release their work, but they have no place, there's like no place, no resource to do it. So you can actually submit your work and they'll publish it digitally. And they've been doing this like continuously. And this is a very new ongoing project, I would like to introduce by Nia. So Nia mostly is like the communicating person, and also like basically to connect different people in their collective. And this one is the one she act as like editor. It's called Mr. Petri, and this is like from an archive work, and this archive is called On History. It's belong to another artist, but in this On History archive, there's a lot of like pictures of like the more like middle class women, like back to the new older era. And when Nia first encountered to this material, she told me she didn't really know how to deal with it. And then she worked with another artist like to work with it. And as you can see why there's like this like kind of small like identity card on the face of the woman is because like on those cards, mostly you can see they're saying like unwise like mistress. So basically if you are a woman back then, you're like a wife of someone or a mother of someone. And why there's lots of this archive is because that at the moment, the government wanted to show how women should be like. So they gather a lot of like government officials' wife and to have like organization and to kind of show like how women's like identity should be seen like under like a state. And those are the picture which was documented back then. And by the way, how they portray it and how they edit is really interesting. They think like, even for those like trivia things, like for how they cook, and actually you can see the document, it's like the account book and everything, the wives or the mom, they actually arrange everything. Like they arrange the event, they know your finance, they cook for you. So actually they do everything and they help each other out. It's like the trivia which like kind of went out of the context of this like state framework. And this is like the funny fact from the newspaper. Basically, that's the first like youth and woman like minister. But when you see her face like in the newspaper, that's also still call her mistress something. So the book Mr. Petri is actually the short of like patriarchy. Like that's their approach, and they're still ongoing, and I'm really like excited how it will look like in the end. And I will go faster. I think I kind of run out of my time. And then here's like another approach like in Indonesia, and this is called like Gallery Gallery. So I will introduce it with another one, which is called Raw Synodic, and they're in 2 different places. This one is in Jakarta, and this one is in Bandung. So they have very similar approach. Basically, they have like their like community kind of based in the traditional market. So you can imagine there's like different booths. There's like vegetables, like spice and tailor next to it, but there's also a booth of like library and exhibiting place for photo book. So Gallery as one, they have like based in 2 different traditional market, and Rouse they have like based in another antique traditional market, and they basically run the program like actively and very often, like every day or like 4 days a week they have program, and they trying to create a system which can support the group of like photo book practitioner. And the funny thing is like there's this project they all have like run by like a duo. And the Gallery are run by Karen and Ari. The other one is run by Grace and the founder. And these 2 women who run it, they all have sort of like more art therapies, like social psychology background. So I felt like this also kind of reflect to the work. Like for example, on the left, it's like Gallery's work called Kuning, and it's talking about like it's a very young artist work. It's her first work talking about her late father who got overdosed and passed away. So that was like a Asian like financial crisis back then. And the right is also a new book. It's called Best Come in Paris. It's also from another artist, her conversation with her late father. So that was like very personal narrative. And this whole like system also really support amateur, like to talk about their personal story in the photo books. And I feel that's a very unique approach, like only will happen in this kind of like collective. And this one is from Rouse. So they have, as I say, they have like built their kind of place like in the traditional market. So there was like, they asked 10 different practitioners to like observe the market and like to reflect and to like have a conversation on it. So that's a really like kind of like the community approach in Indonesia. I feel like there's lots of collectives and people work really like tightly together, and you can see those characters like I mentioned, like Nia, Karen, and Grace. They're all kind of managing, like organizing and managing it and doing lots of community work there. Like I feel like this is also related to the Indonesian culture of like they really are experienced in working communal. And in Thailand, it's a little bit different. And in Thailand, there's like this, I say there's lots of like a little bit more like artist run space, like together. There's also some private gallery founded by the founder itself. And this one is called Bangkok City Gallery, and it's run by Supermas. And the interesting of this gallery is actually they have like two spaces. One space is for exhibition. The other space is called Bookshop Library, which is what I show now in the screen. And their like exhibition are mostly accompanied with like artists who make books. So in the beginning, they have this idea for the supermarket that you don't have to make catalog, because catalog is something you can do actually digitally. So she worked hugely with the artists who work with like physical like booklet, for example. So actually lots of books they make are catalog, but it's like also artist book and also artwork which shows in the exhibition. For example, this one, it looks not like a photo book, but it's actually contain lots of slogan of like Bangkok real estate. And for example, it's time for life, conceptual living. And when you read it, actually you read a scene of like Bangkok landscape. And I feel like that's a very unique approach, like how they work with the artists and how they like show photo book as a medium was an important medium. And that's the opening show they did for this like bookshop library, that the last copy is for reading here, that they actually documented lots of conversation from the reader who come in, and they talk to each other and about the book, and they make the show in a bookstore about it. And the way how they see book as a medium is very different, and the way how they work together are very different, but it also form a very like active and vibrant community based on like photo book and self-publishing. And City is also a co-founder of like Bangkok Art Book Fair, and I really suggest this book fair people should go visit. It's really like interesting and it's very vibrant, and it's based on the really good point that every like people who are interested in this medium will go. So here comes to my final thought. So when I started this study, there's like few practitioners, I really adore their work and I would like to talk to them more. And when I told them I'm doing like this title, Woman Behind the Page, I can feel they hesitate. So I find it very interesting because like they hesitate because they don't want it to be like put in the category of woman. It's a little bit like Nia, like I just briefly mentioned it, like when she saw like there's like this archive of like label female, like you started to doubt like what's that, and I don't want to be put under that category because I'm a female, so I'm doing this and that and this. So it became like a funny situation that I have when I started the project, and then it kept me thinking because so as I say, it's very like personal when it comes to me on this work. So I've been thinking about that. Actually, in my field work, like I always encounter those like women like practitioner. They're everywhere. Like you can see, they're the organizer, they're the artist, they're the designer, they're the printer, they're the binding girl, they're the communicator. They do everything. Basically, they are like doing multiple different characters, like in one for this medium. And even if trivia is like completely everywhere, and they're not doing just like one thing, so it's really hard to define them. And another thing is when it comes to personal story, because when I talked to Pam, the artist, a little bit earlier, she said when she first went out from the college, like there's mostly the chances mostly was given to her like kind of like male like schoolmate. They're doing more like big topic, for example, like politics, national identity, and so on and so on. And actually this is true. It's in a way that for my like my own research, I see mostly like male artists, they're focusing really on big topics. And according to how the approach of like female like self-publisher or like practitioner, it seems like they've focused on more like ambiguous, abstract, personal like issue. But actually, is that true? Because for example, when it comes to Pam, like you can see like her work looks like very personal, but ended up it still kind of reflect her status, where she stands in the society, and where she like how she sees it, just in a more subtle way. Like the connection is there, but it's more like hidden on the surface of the reality. So according to her, so no matter how personal the work is, but she still feel it kind of reflect the political situation she's living in. And this is actually an important cue when it comes to Southeast Asia. So I feel like this personal story and personal approach like become not that personal, and all this multitasking task and characters really matters in the landscape of like women practitioners in Southeast Asia or photobook and self-publishing practice. So this is my sharing, and I hope I introduced the artist and all this approach I really adore like to everybody as an overview. And I would like to have feedbacks and maybe debugging, because most of my materials are like first-handed, so it could be wrong. So please let me know your feedback, and the most welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. That was fantastic. Exhausting, but fantastic. And you've definitely sort of encouraged more travel, I think, should we get the opportunity. So now we want to move on to our second presentation. Again, thank you. There will be time for questions and discussion at the end. So hopefully people are saving thoughts and questions and comments. Surya Nandini Narain is assistant professor in visual studies at the School of Arts and Aesthetics at the Jawaharlal Nehru University in New Delhi. She teaches photography, visual culture, aesthetics, and critical writing, and her own research currently looks at family photographs and domestic visual culture. Looking forward to this, and thank you very much.
Thank you so much for organizing today's program. It's been a wonderful year, and I want to share with you my ongoing research on photo books, how they're made, viewed, and inhabited by women. And I'll just read to keep to time. And it's a rather expansive and open-ended sort of field that I'd kept for myself. So to begin with, where was I really starting? In my current and previous studies on women and photography in India. And so these were the texts that I had written and engaged with the broader theme of women and photography in India. And I'd found that the feminine subject of photography, or the inhabitor of the photo, was being widely discussed in writing, but the female photographer, bookmaker, and viewer find far lesser mention. I'd hoped to look beyond women as subjects of photographs and photo books, and more as the makers, the interveners and viewers, discussants and bearers of narratives of photo books. As such, I wanted to see how the photo book is enlivened and sustained by feminine engagement. And for this, I looked at a range of archival material, from family albums to professionally made photo books. I make the theoretical claim that family albums appear as the predecessors to photo books in modern and contemporary practice, with several interconnections that I shall point out. What is thus a personal and domestic engagement with photography bears a shared vocabulary with professional and artistic practices in mainstream discourse. The formal quality of the photo book resonates with other narratives that photography can create, such as the family album, the contact sheet, the Instagram reel, ascertaining what Dayanita Singh, photo artist and bookmaker, says, and I quote, "I just never saw or experienced photography as single images. The museums grew out of the contact sheets, as did Sent a Letter." That's the first work that you see on the top left, close quotes. Her mother, the photographer and archivist Noni Singh's work with family albums, transitioned to the photo book and then moved online to digital social media platforms, reimagining the same photos with different narratives. I look for continuities between these formats through the woman as subject, author, and viewer, for the commonalities and divergences in their approaches to this range of photographic works and contexts. I also look at different kinds of feminine agencies, the regular middle class housewife as an album maker, as well as the professional photographer and the bookmaker. And through photo books, I explore how women negotiate their own positions and perspectives within larger narratives of family, community, and nation. Now, here are 2 points, 2 images to illustrate this point about the continuum between photo book agencies held by different kinds of women. So Dayanita's well-known work called Privacy bears this image of the Guptu ladies of a single family. And they're from Kolkata's elite social stratum, posing together in this tableau-esque manner in a Thakur Bari, a traditional home that belonged to the feudal landed classes of Bengal. I see resonance in the way in which Dayanita serializes photographic narrative in Privacy, a book about the interior, invisible lives of her social contemporaries in India, as families that appear amid luxurious domestic materiality, and the way in which the character, Shelly Deb, in Nishtha Jain's documentary called Family Album, oralized her family photos. So, set within the same interiors, the women in Nishtha's film speak about their personal memories through family albums that they have preserved for generations. Many images bear these women by themselves, standing alone or in groups, and their descriptions reminisce stories of their youth and bygone days. So the album and the photo book thus occupy a homologous space shared by the same women and their approach to the serialized visual narrative in book form. There are also homologies in the way in these books are kept. An album in a cloth bundle from one of the families that I studied, and then Dayanita's Pothi box series, also tied to keep together the image frames she makes, one a compulsive act of preservation, the other a conscious one, guided aesthetically. From my studies, I found that the palpable intention between women-authored photo books is both exploratory and reparative, responding to social stereotypes attached to femininity and their exclusion and cultural domination. An emergent polyvocality is reflected in the sheer diversity of photo book formats, materials, and visual languages produced by women. The visuality of women and the possibility of a female gaze has not gone entirely unnoticed in the world of photography through writing that is fairly recent. Dwelling on what it means to be, as Leslie Martin says, woman with a camera, a study into feminist visuality in photography has had precedence in landmark projects such as the MoMA's exhibition Ourselves and the earlier Pictures by Women. There's also Anne Collier's book, Women with Cameras. And all of these turn to the subjects of another's lens. Women are observed at work with a camera for the images that they can make for an album or a photo book. So the edited volume, How We See, actually brought out by 10 by 10 photo books, was a great, guide for me to plunge into the history of bookmaking by photo bookmaking by women. And what I ended up doing was reviewing the twin volumes in an attempt to historically grasp this subject. The photographers Homai Vyarawala and Dayanita Singh are featured in the South Asian section of the book already, and they regard the camera as a prosthetic device, an extension of the eye, the arm, or the third breast, bringing in the bodily sensorium into birthing images, as Singh says. The photo book thus takes shape of sensorial objects emanating from the very experience of seeing in a haptic manifestation of the act of looking. I discovered that these book producers were in fact interested in a wide variety of themes, including botanical studies, urbanization, and landscape, upturning some of our presumptions about them, widening the scope of this area of study. Importantly, the second volume bears a section called A Global Awakening that acknowledges Dayanita's work called Zakir Hussain and asks if there are no other women photo book makers in South Asia at the time. In the light of an expanded definition of the book offered by this volume, one is inclined to think that there are more works, couched as albums, scrapbooks, and diaries that are yet to surface from this part of the world. Overwhelmingly, photo books by women address femininity in a manner that is more central to them than the address to masculinity is for male authors of photo books, and this is open to question and critique, of course. The central question then remains, how deeply can we read womanhood or female identity into photographs and photo books by women? How do men and women perhaps make different photo books? Between these binaries lies the space for a spectrum of sexualities, ambiguities, dealt with mystery, pathos, and humor, pushing the boundaries of photography to visually represent the ungraspable, not to simplify, but to lay out complexities of the real world. One of the outcomes of looking at and teaching the history of photo books was a fascination in my class that I teach on photography, and I brought this discussion into the classroom. And one of the things we were very curious about was the older methods of photography. And Anna Atkins' book, in fact, on algae done in cyanotype, informed my students at JNU to do a workshop in the medium at Museo Camera in Gurgaon near Delhi. My students and I also went to Anshika Verma's archive called Offset Projects in November last year. Here we interacted with her large photo book collection and had several discussions about the medium. It led some of us to conclude that women photographers and photo bookmakers have gone beyond the concerns of gender in their work, even though their relegation into oblivion is mostly due to their own female identity. A convincing kind of linear connection can be made between older practices of women collating photographs into albums and their later authorship of photo books. And we saw examples of this at offset projects, such as the work Braided by Sheetal Mallar, which is in which women's authorship is reflected in the domestication of album design, emanating from everyday materialities of needlework, lace making, and painting. And the well-known book by DiBello, Women's Albums and Photography in Victorian England, foregrounds a 19th century feminine preoccupation with the creation and preservation of family albums. She also considers the significant practice of women making albums with photographs produced by others besides their own, cultivating a craft-intensive exercise of material engagements with textiles, collaging, and accretions from everyday domesticity, enhancing the tactility of their albums. The photo book otherwise anticipates training in photography and bookmaking, often learnt on the go with male bookmakers and publishers in the field. Having operated outside the formal networks of photographic clubs and printing presses, the album remains a singular, non-reproducible predecessor of the photo book, differentiated from the latter that appears in editions or multiples meant for commercial circulation. The album's vocabulary carries over to the modern moment when the creation of the photo book is facilitated by mechanical reproduction. Yet, these material linkages challenge photography's predominantly masculine authorship. At Offset Projects, we noticed that the photo book addresses femininity even without female authorship, as seen in the works of Divas K. Raja from Nepal, who as a man has worked with women's albums to foreground hidden histories in the edited volume called Guftagu, published by Offset. Raja delves into 3 family albums from Nepal Picture Library, and draws affiliation between 3 feminists with socialist loyalties from the 1960s to the 1990s. I hypothesize that several other experiments in format took place when it came to photography and the book in contemporary practice that have happened recently. Indu Antony's body of work called Aval, and that's at the on the right, literally meaning they, was on display at Alliance Francaise in Delhi in 2021. This is a work that serializes found photographs of unknown women, of which the artist makes salt prints framed with strands of her own hair, enshrined with these candle-like lights. And that evokes a certain reverence towards these unknown women. There are 83 images collected since 2008, and this work actually comes across as an album that's been taken apart or opened up. In contrast, there is Shan Bhattacharya's book called Portal, and that's at the bottom left, which is a diary that contains a collection of found photographic prints, letters, torn pages from books, newspapers, magazine cuttings, organized to form a comprehensive detective-like narrative. The final book actually is a found archive that tries to trace photographic evidence and information about an elusive woman who seemingly does not age across this 30-year period that her photographs cover. It's a work of fiction, an artistic act of serializing images that do not otherwise belong, a photo book inhabited by an unknown woman, a stranger who occupies various social identities across time, navigated photographically. The proposition that the album and the photo book can also coexist metaphorically is an important one. In my work, I examine how the album as image object is woven into domestic fabric of middle-class homes, constructing feminine identity, functioning as a reminder of ordinary events and rites of passage. Several photo books by women themselves reference the subject matter of family, private spaces, and personal relationships. I explore the expectations from the display of albums, looking instead at more intimate, accidental, or deliberate contexts within which family images are serialized and kept hidden or seen in plain view. Domesticity is also referenced regularly in literal and abstract ways. See, for instance, the works of the twin photographer sisters Manobina Roy and Debolina Mazumdar, specifically their co-produced album called Lina Bina after their pet names. And they operate from the 1930s onwards up till the 1980s. This was part of an exhibition that traveled to Kolkata and Delhi in 2022, curated by Sabina Gatti-Hope, Malika Leosinga, and Tapati Guha Thakurta, celebrating the twins' centenary year that I'd also helped organize. Such a document is hard to define as a family album alone. It exceeds the interior reference of kinship to include suggestions of worldly exploration and photographic experimentation by the two amateur photographers. It bears photos of their children and homes, but also of their travels to London and Europe and of various scenes from everyday street life. Manobina and Debolina's reflections on post-war Indian society, their own privileged social stratum, family and domesticity, as well as the inseparability of the camera from their own bodies, are narratives in feminine visuality. Although this work was not reproduced for sale, Lina Bina heralds the possibility of more women from this part of the world to reveal their authorship of photo books, documents considered too private or singular so far. I briefly return to Dayanita's Museum Bhavan and recent publication Book Building as a final examination of how the photo book in her work bears resonance with the frame, the box, the exhibition, architectural spaces like the home and museum, changing from one to the other. Museum Bhavan is a critique of the fixity of artworks in curated museum projects, as it articulates a certain fluidity desired in the book format, where pages can be removed and replaced with others, where stories can be changed constantly and new ones can be crafted. Book building is a study in Singh's major works, several of them photo books, in the background, the logic, materiality, and display practices invited by her works. Singh looks at the photo book both as process and a product, something constantly in transition as it acquires meaning in different contexts. This shape-shifting entity activates the images within her photo books as they appear in dialogue with one another, as well as with the viewers of the books and the families that she photographs across time and space. More recently, I engaged with the domestic and archival space of Dayanita's own dwellings in Delhi in order to open out her home, where museums, boxes, suitcases, and books gestate. My essay on this encounter is to be published in an edited volume later this year titled Oikography, which is Studies of the Home Through Photography, meaning how home can be looked at, and it's edited by Ali Shoberi and Helen Westgeest of Leiden University. Moving now to the domestic album maker, I ask how albums are made by women who differ along the verticals of age, generation, class, and photographic practice. I recently researched and published an essay on middle-class women's holiday albums in a volume edited by Kate Belden Adams and Mary Trent as a specific category within the genre of photo books. These albums from India, which subvert the historical idea of the eastbound white male explorer, do not reflect home and away as exclusionary domains. They carry their domesticity with them on their travels. I regard the Prashad women, whose album I looked at, as examples of how single women of the Indian middle class have vacationed in a foreign country, visiting family, but also gaining exposure to a new culture in a globalized world. The 4 albums studied in this essay range from the 1950s to the 90s, encapsulating the touristic engagements of the album makers over nearly 4 decades. The albums belong to different time frames in the family's history, but they also address the alternative ideological phases in India's political economy. The subjectivity of their narratives aligns with Gillian Rose's notion of a matrilineal traditional responsibility for domestic order, which places women in charge of domestic material objects and images and of steering the meanings of those artifacts that they inherit, create, and impart. As such, they generate alternative visual narratives when considered in an Indian context, providing photographic documentation and familial wholeness. And I argue that the albums index a strong sense of familial togetherness among the women, played out in acts of mutual support and companionship in everyday life. So I explore these roles assumed by the 3 generations and how they shape and maintain a certain material and emotional economy within their families through the photographic archive. The photos appearing in these albums make a personal claim to familial integrity in a way that individual images never can. However, the oral narration of memories that speak for and about family photos time and time again remobilize them, unfix them, and make them contingent entities with multiple possible meanings. Another inquiry in my research is regarding the material specificities that manifest across aesthetic choices in album making. How do the worlds of ready-made albums, which of this kind, this example is of a ready-made album with plastic sleeves, differ from the ones made by hand? How are photographs themselves treated, imbued with application of, say, cloth, color, or tikas, the mark in the forehead, and how are figures cut out or pasted into family montages? What is the role of text in defining but also exploring family histories in these albums? Can the old binaries of art and craft be challenged through these artifacts where women have found spaces for self-expression? Centrally, how do women, as kingpins of families and archivists of family albums, negotiate their own positions and perspectives within larger narratives of family, community, and nation? Here I look at the domestic travel albums by women who, despite familial responsibilities and financial constraints, fulfill their desire to explore India's national cartography, their readings and affective insights precipitating in visually complex albums. This is part of my essay for a co-edited volume by myself and Shilpi Goswami titled Framing portraits, binding albums, family photographs in India, due to be published by Zuban Publications this year. I've observed how a single family can within itself have contesting visual narratives through different photo books that spread across media, context, and authorship, diversifying microhistories in myriad ways. Such comparisons are made possible through the personal album when looked as a mnemonic device for the lives and recollections of women in moments that exist outside of the daily male-dominated discourses, while offering parallel microhistories of intimate cultures of domesticity that remain undiscovered. In order to share this work with wider audiences, I gave several talks, recently at the Shiv Nadar University in Delhi, one at Folkwang University in Germany. There was one online at the University of Norway, Tromsø, and one at INSEAD in Paris. And that actually generated a lot of very, very helpful conversations and inputs into my work. I'd like to now conclude by asking the last set of questions, and that through Noni Singh herself. What are the major shifts in album or photo bookmaking that middle-class women have espoused in the digital age? How do social media spaces dematerialize the photo book? And what is the new feminine consciousness regarding the global circulation of private family photographs? So a real change in form. It is not new to see the kinship between photo archives online, say on Instagram, and the photo book, as serialization, linearity, the co-presence of images on people's accounts become important traces for patterns of thought. This is an area under exploration for me, for the novelty of the digital medium and its possibilities. And this is an interesting image because Noni Singh goes back to the idea of coloring the photograph, the black and white photograph, which is a very old practice of overpainting in Indian photography, especially. But it's displayed on a social media platform digitally. On the one hand is the sheer ease of putting together, transferring, and accessing this dematerialized album or photo book, while on the other is the absence of any haptic engagement with images, something so central to the analog formats experience. Finally, and I close now, that this kind of analysis between self-identity and visual material, womanhood and album or photo book, can be as deep a reading into gendered practices or skim over that interconnection to neutralize authorship. As an emerging field, it remains to be seen what kind of theoretical possibilities emerge from such a study in method, medium, and production. And I look forward to your questions and comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And indeed, a lot to hopefully follow up and talk more about, but also a lot to think about. So thank you very much. And now our third speaker. Sorry, just trying to do two things at once here. Sunyoung Kim lives and works in Seoul. Since 2010, she has been working for Museum Hanmi, formerly the Museum of Photography Seoul, as senior curator. Recent exhibitions include Beyond the Frames, the Centennial of Korean Art Photography, 1920 to 2020, William Klein, Dear Folks, and a series of exhibitions of emerging Korean artists. She has regularly written columns on expanded photography for the Korean photography magazine Photo Arts, has interviewed various artists and curators in the contemporary photography scene, and since 2015, leads the open call program MH Talent Portfolio, aimed at fostering diverse collaborations between young artists. Thank you very much, and over to you.
Yep, thank you, Dave, for the nice introductions. So now I'm sharing my screen. All right. So hello, my name is Sunyoung Kim from Seoul, South Korea. I'm so grateful for this rare opportunity to dive into a topic I'm interested in and discuss with you today, all thanks to the 10x10 research grants. I know the focus of today's discussion is technically on photo books, but I want to shift the spotlight to something a bit different, magazines. To be more specific, women's lifestyle magazines of the 1960s in South Korea. This is a table of contents I'd like to explore with you today. So these women's lifestyle magazines played a crucial role for women photographers during that time in 1960s, giving them their first shot at being recognized as professionals and encourage them to explore their own visual storytelling. So this presentation will closely examine serial features across numerous pages created by women photographers, delving into how they structured visual narratives and strive to voice themselves. Given that it was their initial endeavor to blend photographs and written text together to form a coherent visual narrative within the pages, I intend to view these magazines not just as magazines, but rather as a precursor that evolved into women's photo book in their history. I started to closely look at these magazines and female photojournalist activities after visiting the exhibition, as now you see, the titled Korean Women Photographers, Women's Photography Movement in the 1980s. It was a main exhibition program for 2021 Seoul Photo Festival, curated by Kyung-min Lee. He's actually the photo historian. And while the exhibition primarily centered around the 1980s, the show also shed light on the early presence of female photographers in the public sphere through magazines. The show highlighted a few highly significant portfolios by women photographers found within the pages, marking the first attempt to discover and showcase such content. Working as photojournalist for popular magazines or newspaper appeared to be the primary avenue for women aiming to pursue photography career during the 1950s and 1960s. So since the 1950s, South Korea has witnessed a surge in popular magazines with numerous publications being established, and several female photographers embarked on their careers as photojournalists for these magazines, and particularly these tailored for women readership. These women had undergone training through limited channels at the time to become photographers, of course, including joining university photo club, participating in social clubs whose members were mainly male, or majoring in photography at universities. We had the first photo department in major in 1954, but it was not like an official department of photography. It was rather like under the Department of the Art. But in 1954, people, the women and students, they could actually study photography in a kind of official education. Or entering photography contests. So there were the limited channels to become a photographer. And among them, just a minority secured positions at magazines. And the reason was not just because this position was challenging to obtain, but also due to the societal norms at the time prioritizing women's role as homemakers, expected to be more devoted to their families. The circular shaped photo you see now is a portrait of Miss Kim Yong-sun, who was introduced as a camera woman in the Yeowon 1958 issue, one of the popular women's magazine at the time. The article named her as a trailblazer in women's professions, reflecting the rarity of women becoming photographers for the pages during that time. In the 1960s, there was a group of magazines catering to women readership, competing as commercial entities. While there were more magazines, today I chose these four because they were the first archives where we could find a few serial features by women photographers. The Yeowon, the second one, stood out for being the first post-war women's magazine to establish itself as a commercial entity, featuring color advertisement for the first time. Yeosang, on the far right, emerged later, but quickly became a strong rival of Yeowon during the 1960s, offering over 1.5 times the amount of content across its pages compared to Yeowon. These two magazines, renowned during that time, actively engaged in a number of women photographers who had just entered the field in the late 1950s and early 1960s, providing them with pages for visual exploration. Now, in this presentation, we will closely look at a selection of serial features by especially two photographers, Min Kyung-ja, here, and Park Young-suk, who joined Yeowon in 1964 and Yeosang in 1965, respectively. They were among the most prolific contributors to the early pages of magazine publication as female photojournalists. Both of them were founding members of the first photography club for women at Sunyoung Women's University. Min Kyung-ja was formerly a photo reporter for the school's newspaper club at Sunyoung University, while Park Young-suk was the founder of the school's photography club, Sungmihoe. The club Sungmihoe has actually produced numerous professionals actively working in contemporary photography scene, including women artists, museum directors, gallery owners, journalists, educators, and publishers. And this is the leaflet you see here now. This is the leaflet of the 6th annual exhibition of Sungmihoe, having Park Young-suk on the far right here. And we also have the picture of the Sungmihoe members during the 1960s going outdoor shootings. Additionally, Min and Park, they were also the members of the Modern Photography Society, which played a pivotal role in shaping modern Korean photography during 1960s through 1980s. So you see here the only two women among the male members. And actually, those male members are really important figures in the modern Korean photography. So they're really filling the chapters of the very first art photography and documentary photography field in Korean history. On the pages of the magazines, Min and Park created serial features revolving around particular themes and certain structures. At the period, as you can imagine, most magazine pages were predominantly occupied by single reports, advertisements, soap opera stories, columns, and articles, mostly concerning women's appearance, fashion, and family life. Differently from that, both Min and Park gradually and persistently emphasizes the significance of photographs and their capabilities, accentuating the unique visual storytelling aspects of images. Min Kyung-ja, she produced several captivating features during her time at Yeowon for about 3 years. And one of the first features was called Photo Story, you see now. So it consists of short stories accompanied by photographs, as the title suggests. So it was a collaborative effort between a photographer and a novelist. And Min covered the entirety of this feature series as a photographer until the feature closed, completing 3 individual stories. Each feature typically spanned 5 or 6 pages, and approximately 5 features constituted a single story. And this means that a complete story unfolded over about 6 months, with a new feature introduced each month, because the magazines they work for is usually the monthly magazine. Most of the pictures were staged photographs featuring regular models. So they are actually the same models to help enhance the written narrative. And the background, props, and gestures of models closely aligned with the stories, indicating that the photographs remained faithful depictions for the written text yet, rather than introducing new standalone ideas. The stories were largely reminiscent of soap opera, mostly, modeling the portrayal of women in photographs to align with conservative viewpoints, often depicting them as submissive and devoted characters. However, Min's endeavor to convey the essence and subtlety of the narrative through only 5 or 6 concise scenes per feature is still noteworthy. Through careful selection of visual elements, the pages flow quite seamlessly, resulting in a complete, intense, and concise visual narrative. And also, I love how she tried the different layouts of the pages in a mixture of the photographs and texts. This is another serial feature by Min titled Life of a Commoner Like This. The series portrays a day in the life of a woman with unconventional professions for the time, such as a nude model, or for the atelier or art college, a member of a folk band, or a daycare teacher. It consists of 8 panel images that not only depict the protagonist's daily routines, but also delve into their personality and thoughts. While the title labels them as commoners, it ironically implies that they are far from the ordinary. Despite societal prejudice that implicitly marginalize these groups of women, the photographer presents a direct and empathetic perspective on their experience. The image, so this one is the life of the folk band member. So the images aim to provide a comprehensive portrayal of the protagonists, going beyond their roles as workers to reflect on their individuality and aspirations as well. It means photographs on the pages in the 1960s, a variety of gender perspectives are evident, blending traditional and modern societal view that formed twisted stereotypes of women, along with the blatant gazes of male editors or publishers, and also means her own rebellious, but also sometimes aligning perspectives against or towards social norms. So it's really a kind of a mixture of all the different gendered politics and stereotypes perspectives as well, I think. This is another passionate feature by Min Kyung-ja. After her retirement, Munye, another junior woman photographer, took over and continued until 1968. The feature aimed to depict the lives of women in various regions of the country, reflecting their customs and environment. So she actually, she played, even though in the women's photography history, now we really don't really remember a lot about Min Kyung-ja. But when I just flipped through all the pages in the magazine during the 1960s, I just recognized that she was one of the vigorous photojournalists at the time. So I hope that if we have any time more, I might say a little bit more about the story about this feature. And now I'd like to jump on to another photographer, Young-suk Park Young-suk. The representative feature created by Park Young-suk during her tenure at Yeosang, the rival magazine of Yeowon, are poetry and photography, and Journey with Poetry to Korea. So 2 features. Park visualized emerging imagery while reading poems. As poetry conveys connotative forms of text, the photographs do not merely mirror the lyrics, but instead provide a subjective space to interpret the lines. Typically comprising 3 to 5 photographs paired with a poem, each individual feature enables readers to identify the visual arrangement and grouping of the images. Park's approach aims to avoid typical composition. For instance, when portraying a female protagonist, instead of the usual close-up of her face with a blurred background, Park challenged the conventional use of the camera by widening the camera's focus length, thereby beginning to carefully consider the relationship between the subject and surroundings as well, and often unexpectedly cropping the frame as well. Furthermore, in another feature, Journey with Poetry to Korea, Park's deliberate attempt to capture the modernized essence of Korea beauty is evident. Through poems infused with emotions and sentiments that resonate with Koreans, Park endeavored to portray Korean beauty in various aspects of nature, vision, tradition, and femininity, attempting to intertwining them in a fresh challenge. The poem featured in the last section, this is the last section, I extract the poems here and translate it in English so you can have a look. So the poem featured in the last section, The Silence of Love, employs poetic expressions such as into the autumn tinted forest and the silent and turn to cold ashes blown away in the breeze of wind, which are distinctly Korean way of conveying sentiments of falsehood. And Park's photographs closely align with this sentiment by portraying a woman locked in sadness. And as a result, I think it created a very innovative and creative imagery about the female protagonists. While these two serial pictures may appear similar to informative photo story by Min Kyung-ja, as you saw before, in terms that they involve collaboration between the photographer and writer, Park's photographs stand out as more independent and self-contained, I suppose. Min's approach rather involves carefully shaping her characters within predefined societal stereotypes, depicting them as noble wife, diligent student, and devoted daughter to her widow father, something kind of. Min strategically selected props, models, gestures, and attire to signify the protagonist's assigned social position in the story. However, I think Park is a bit different. She tended to create more direct and emotionally resonant images that reflect feminine sensibilities. So she presented female protagonists as nuanced individuals carrying complex emotions such as solitude, longing, and sorrow. So she prioritized capturing the inner emotions of her subjects, regardless of their societal roles or circumstances. And such her portrayals had strong positive feedbacks during the time from the readership as well. More importantly, Park organized the first solo exhibition showing the images from these two features in 1966, the year when she departed from the Yeosang, the magazine. And so far, this exhibition is recorded as the first exhibition by women photographers in South Korea. And you see the posters here, and also the newspaper articles about her exhibition. So a lot of people were very focused on her own kind of, somebody said it's a kind of feminine visual language about the subject. So during the 1960s in Korea, women's lifestyle magazines shared a vision to advocate for women's enlightenment, which was crucial for the nation's development after the Korean War. And they championed the idea of a culturally redefined woman, a concept that evolved very differently based on gender, time period, age group, and region. And in the 1950s, women were portrayed as both empowered civil builders and at the same time contented modern wives satisfied with romantic love and domestic life. This complex portrayal continued into the 1960s, with women increasingly empowered as essential to national progress during rapid industrialization. And it continued to the 1970s, of course. They were envisioned as graceful women with deep devotion and physical attraction as well, of course, and obedient to their beloved husband or fathers, while also being the most influential and strong driving force behind the nation's reconstruction after the war. Thus, the portrayal of the women in photographs could not be straightforward either. It was intertwined with the complex blend of societal expectations regarding femininity and the role of women as a driving force. And this complexity is further compounded when the portrayers and photographers are women themselves. Despite being influenced by these societal expectations, they yearn to be recognized as independent and innovative individuals. Identifying as a female photographer during the 1960s in South Korea was not commonplace. It set them apart from the majority of women who embraced solely the role of housewife after marriage. Even when they hold a camera, the society often found themselves in a constant struggle between their professional aspirations and societal norms. Their images of women photographers as a means, so this is actually the kind of the lines from the newspaper. So then you can see how they actually portray the female photographers at the time. So the society often labeled them as housewife photographer, expected to capture domestic life and pre-marital training. These photographers found themselves in a constant struggle. So in these social norms, the photographers who pursue their career as the photojournalists, they have to do the constant struggle between their professional aspirations and the social norms. And their images of women served as a means of questioning their own future, straddling the line between the being perceived as professional photographers and household documenters. And they also persevered in seeking validation and self-assurance as well. And I think the pages they made in the magazines is a kind of the testimony for themselves, but also for the public. So consequently, I would say these photographs on the page mark the beginning of the women's photobook history, but also more importantly, the history of women's movement in Korean photography. So they're still for themselves and for the public and for the others, they struggle to ask themselves and ask the people that who they are and how they can actually pursue as a photographer, and they are permitted or they can do by themselves to do this job. Although not many people are really focused on these materials yet in Korea, but I think this is really a important kind of pre-archive to look in to see how they mirror themselves as a photographer. And I hope this presentation sparks your interest in this topic. And thank you very much for your listening. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And yes, it has definitely sparked interest. So we will now sort of go into a discussion Q&A phase. Again, for folks who are in the audience, if you have questions, I'll start with a couple, but then if folks would like to ask any of the panelists questions, or if you'd like to ask them of each other, we can do that. So again, perhaps initially just a round of thanks to the three speakers for I think what would have been a very interesting set of topics. Let's see. To maybe start things off a little bit, and Sunyoung, since you were just speaking, I was kind of wondering, a couple things. One was whether some of these extended photo essays, photo sequences in turn became books. So was there, in some cases, a progression of some of the essays that would appear in magazine form and might then move into book form? And also, you talked a lot about sort of the image and text connection, both in the poetry world as well as in sort of the fiction side. And I was wondering if you uncovered more as to kind of how that worked. Would the editor share the text with the photographer ahead of time and ask them, or was there kind of a more active collaboration?
So thank you for the questions, Dave. For the first question, unfortunately not. No, there was no kind of book form developed. But as I said in the presentation, there was the Park Young-suk who actually presented those materials, those works. She worked for the magazines, for the exhibition. And this was actually the first exhibition in the photo history in Korea by women. But she unfortunately didn't make the catalog of book. So there is no, so we only have a magazine pages. And for the second questions, I was also very wondering how the photographers, female photographers, they could co-work with designers and editors at the time. And I had a opportunity to talk with the Park Young-suk about the period, but she said she could really lead her opinions quite vigorously to suggest the idea about the layouts and how to compose the text and photographs together. But usually the poems and novels, they're already written. So they were written first, and the photographer, they refer to the text and go out for the photographing. So that's the kind of the order of the process. But for the layout of the page, I think, as Park said, they can actually, express their ideas, but it was very hard to be admitted because majority of the editors and workers for the magazines were males. So it's really hard to do. But they tried, but sometimes it was admitted and sometimes not. But I also thought that during the working on these materials, it might be really valuable to meet somebody who worked for the male people who work for the editing or designing the pages. So what's happening, to have a broad view of that. Yeah.
Thank you. And Junye, again, there was a sort of fascinating tour through Southeast Asia. And you talked kind of about how these artists took on roles or take on roles of sort of publisher, designer, etc., as well as some of the sort of approval or censorship regimes that they're dealing with. And I was kind of wondering, first off, how much of the audience and sort of the reception side is taken into account, in some of these areas as they are developing the book, and sort of how they think about the audience, but also how much they take some of these practical limitations into account and sort of how the book perhaps changes as it goes through that process.
Thank you, David, for the question. And like the first one, actually, I was first referred to the Book Fair first because they're the most easy platform for the audience to encounter with photo books. And actually, surprisingly, there are different numbers differences. So the Singapore Book Fair is basically the biggest one. But for example, when Bangkok Book Fair started, the first year they have like relatively not a lot of exhibitor, like maybe 50 or something, but their audience is already like 3,000 according to the founder. So I feel that's really quite a lot, because in Taiwan, when we also have the book fair, it's somehow even harder to gather the audience. So consider that, I would say there was like pretty much kind of increasing reader in the region. And because of the art book fair, they were kind of organized by different group of people. So I don't really have time to go deep into it. But in Southeast Asia, they're mostly like designer groups who are interested in it. And the Singapore one is a little bit different. But so the audience will also shift, because the content and the interest of the art book fair are a little bit different. And in my research, I took like photobook as the most like kind of like a broad terms. Basically, any kind of practice concept related to image are kind of accountable, and or even like different kind of performance for me, if it's also related to the publication practice, is also accountable. So if we see that, actually it's quite, I think it's bigger crowd than I expected in Taiwan, for example. And then for the second question was, I forgot. What was the second question?
Well, I think it was a little bit about how the some of the practical limitations, whether it's the process or otherwise,
Yes.
sort of change the book as it goes through a design process.
That's actually something I really want to talk to, but I was like really kind of running around, so I didn't really talk to that. But I think there was like an important thing in the Southeast Asia, like photo book publishing, it's that actually they do a lot of print on demand. So as I talk about, I used to like write this book about tropical reading. I also mentioned the changing of like the landscape of Indonesian photo book publishing the past decade. Basically, because of the limitation at first, they use a lot of like very, very flexible way. You can see how they use the materials. Like if you aim to really high quality of the printing, that it's really difficult. So they're really good at working with that. I mean, you can call it glitch, you can call it like local source, local use, but it was actually very fascinating. And also the publisher or artist I introduced earlier, they're mostly using print on demand. So you can see their quantity of book is actually not that much. Sometimes it's like 1, sometimes it's like 20, sometimes it's like 60. It really depends. So I think this definitely influenced the material, like the choice of the material or the method of design and printing. And also there's 1 or 2 like very famous like printing house around the region. For example, the Bangkok Art Book Fair, they always kind of sponsored by this one printing house called Propane. They the second generation like owner are really like generous. So when they're in their more like the season for the Bangkok Art Book Fair, actually, I'm not sure if they still keep doing this, but in the beginning, you actually got discount. So you can print relatively little amount in that big printing house, and you can get discount if you're the exhibitor of Bangkok Book Fair. So I personally think that's a really good like circulation between printers and organizer and artists.
Thank you. And Dayanita, you took sort of in exploring the album, a very inclusive view of what a photo book might be, whether an album, a container or box, or in some cases a whole house or room. And in these different modes, sort of the extent to which the reader forms their own route or own kind of experience in dealing with things. And I was kind of wondering if you also thought about what elements of maybe a more traditional book, the selection of images, sequencing, choice of materials, persist across these different kind of formats, and how the criteria might change in sort of evaluating or thinking about some of these elements of book design in these more unconventional formats.
Thank you, David. I think that it was very confusing by the end of it when I tried to just expand the definition of the photo book to include so much. But because I was looking at also the maker, spanning from being a housewife to a professional photographer, that there was this range of people who could produce book or book-like productions and what that meant, and none really excluded the other. If I spoke to a photo bookmaker who was entirely professional, it wasn't as if she did not refer to the album or had not referred to the magazine, or even display practices within the home. This is what basically pushed me out to look at the form of the photograph, a photo book, as a very inclusive one. What persists in terms of consistency is, of course, the operation of the camera. And knowing that photography itself has its own vocabulary, its own privileges, but also limitations, and aesthetics and technology at the point of image making was something that did inform people at the point of production. But then what they did with the images is simply marvelous. You know, it went all over the place, really. And the kind of liberties that people took with family albums preempted some of the some of the forms that the photo book takes. So something like the montage, which is happening in the family album, or scribbling along the margins, which is over there, is something that I did see resonating in the photo book, and the kind of freedom that the photo book also gives. So I think it is within the allowances that the photo book in print form or conventional form gives, is what makes these outward references possible. Even something like a needle and thread in the photo book is something that is unusual for the idea of a book, but something very instinctive almost for somebody making a family album. So these connections were unavoidable, really, in the case studies that I looked at. And perhaps I don't have a resolved answer for your question, but something that I hope will surface.
Thank you. By the way, there are some effusive thanks from some of the people who had to drop after the presentations in the chat, in case you want to take a quick look, and we'll save those as well. Does anyone from the audience have any questions they would like to ask? You should be able to unmute yourselves. If so, I know it's been a long session, so we'll probably wrap up pretty soon, but anything from anyone in the audience, or if any of you would like to ask each other of the speakers a question. I think we may have exhausted people a little bit, but then let me just again thank you so much. This has been a terrific set of ideas and presentations. This will be recorded, or it has been recorded, and will be shared and posted, and perhaps there will be an opportunity as other people look at it. We'll sort of indicate that if folks have questions and you're interested in continuing the discussions, we can do so. But otherwise, have a good day ahead of you for those of you in Asia. For those who have stayed with us here in the US or even in Europe, perhaps, have a good evening. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Dave, for this rare opportunity. We enjoyed a lot.
Thank you so
yes,
much.
For everyone who joined this, Zoom talk as well.
And again, if anyone wants to unmute and just clap or say hello, that's fine too. I will turn off the recording now, though.